Today's daf we're going to be learning is Menachot daf Ayin Daled. Today's daf is sponsored by Abi Sasland in loving memory of Harav Yitzchak Abi Ben Binyamin Belea, Rabbi Henry Sasland. His commitment to learning continues to inspire. Yehi Zichor Baruch. We're going to get started with the Breita that we started in yesterday's daf. We had a Breita. We're basically trying to figure out the source for the rabbis, the Tanna Kamma's opinion, and Rabbi Shimon's position about what to do with the Menachot Chote of a Kohen. If a Kohen sins and brings a sliding scale offering, they're very poor, and they bring the Mincha offering, does it get completely burned like a Minchat Nedava? That's what the rabbi's position is, and we saw that at the end of yesterday's daf. Vayta lekohen kimincha. That it is for the Kohen, and they darshaned it. This is in the Olav Yored section. It's like the Kohen, for the Kohen, like his mincha, meaning if a Kohen, again, this is the drasha, not the simple reading, if the Kohen brings it, it's treated like his mincha, to which Rabbi Shimon said, what do you mean? It doesn't say the mincha, the vayala Kohen, ki minchato, like his mincha, which is the way you just interpret it. It says vayala Kohen, ki mincha, like a regular mincha. It's not so clear that that's what it means. So, Ela, we're going to start with the last two words in Daf Ayin Gimel. Ela, Lahakish minchat chote shel kohanim ki minchat chote shel Yisrael. What it means is the mincha of a kohen is like the mincha of anybody else. Now, we're going to see it's not exactly, but ma minchat chote shel Yisrael nikmetzet, just like the mincha chote of a regular Yisrael has, we take the kometz out. Af minchat chote shel kohanim nikmetzet. And that's Rabbi Shimon Shita, that you take a kometz out of it. And then you burn all of it, though, as opposed to the mincha of a regular Yisrael where the Shirayim go to the Kohen. So we're going to see how we get there. So wait, if it's going to be really like the mincha of a regular Yisrael, then it's nikmetzet and the remainder is eaten. So the mincha chote of the Kohanim should be the same way. But that's not the case. Talmud Lamal, that's why it says, La Kohen kamincha. La Kohen kamincha v'lo li'ishim kamincha. It's similar in the aspect of what the Kohen does. The Kohen does the kometz, takes the handful. In that way it's similar. But not similar in the way it's burned, because it's burned differently. Okay? And that's why the whole thing gets burned. Remember, the shirayim get burned as opposed to being given to the Kohanim. Right? So HaKetzad, how does this work? That it's like the mincha for the Kohen's sake, but it's different than the fire. Kometz karev batzmo v'shirayim krevim batzma. Right? So everything then ends up being sacrificed on their own. Now we're going to go back to something that was mentioned in the Breita. The Breita had mentioned that Hashat, in the beginning of the Breita, it said, Hayta Kohen kamincha, which is that the avodah is kshera bo, that a Kohen who wants to do his own avodah, a Kohen has to bring a mincha chote, that Kohen can go to the temple and say, I want to bring my own sacrifice, I want to work, do the avodah myself, do all the rituals. So, shetehei avodatak sherabo mehacha nafka, really, it's learned from that pasuk. Mehatam nafka, it's actually learned from a different pasuk entirely. Minayin lekohen sheba makriv korbonotav bechol et v'chol sha'ash yirtzeh. How do you know that a kohen can go and sacrifice his own sacrifice whenever he wants? We learned that there's mishmarot, there's rotations, but if the kohen wants, the kohen can sacrifice it whenever he wants. In other words, you can go to the temple when it's not your week, and you can say, I want to bring a sacrifice and I want to do the avodah myself, even though it's not your turn. Talmud Lomal, how do we know this? Uba b'cholav nafsho v'sheret. Okay, here's a pasuk in Sefer Bamidbar, which says that it actually says the Leviim, but it obviously means the Kohanim, and they can come whenever they want to serve. So from there we imply that, right, Kohen who wants to do their own avodah is allowed to, again, when they want to bring their own sacrifices. So same thing with the mincha chote. Why should that be any different? And therefore, why do we learn it from here? We can learn it from that pasuk. To which they said, no, because if it was from there, then you would say maybe that's only for something that doesn't come for sin. Because for sin, maybe you need someone else to help atone for you. Maybe you can't do it yourself. Right? So for a sin, maybe it wouldn't be true. And b'chalavat nafsho, also the context of that is whenever you want. That's voluntary. So they say, but wait, even for a sin, we can darshan this. Why? Because it says in a pasuk, I'm sorry, my mistake. The pasuk we quoted before with the b'chalavat nafsho is actually from Devarim chapter 18. I was thinking this next pasuk is from Bamidbar. Okay, so now they say, but wait, that's also learned. The fact that a kohen can sin, if his kohen sins and wants to bring his own korban for atonement and do the ritual he's allowed to, that's starting from a different pasuk. There's a little redundancy in this pasuk. It says the kohen atones for the soul that accidentally sinned, in his sin unwittingly. Okay, that's unwitting. We already know is unwitting. Why do we say bishkaga hashogeget and bishkaga? So what did they learn from here? The bishkaga is to include an extra person, meaning a kohen who wants to atone for himself is allowed to. So now the Gemara says, right, now we have three psukim in essence saying the same thing. So b'cholavat nafsho means voluntary ones. The bishkaga means when it's even sin offerings. So what do we need our pasuk for? Obviously, what's missing? Well, that only means if you did it unwittingly. But aval b'mezid lo, but maybe not if you did something intentional, and therefore our pasuk comes to say, even if you did it intentionally, you'd be able to kamash malan, you'd be able to go and do the avodah yourself. B'mezid hechem ishkachala. Wait, when are you going to have a korban for mezid? Most of the korbanot chatat, sin offerings, are usually if you did it unwittingly. Right? Like you ate chelev by accident, you bring korban chatat. If you did it on purpose, you get karet. So what are we talking about? Bizdon shvuah. If you intentionally, okay, so now we're going to talk about what's zdon shvuah, where you swore that you didn't know testimony for someone and you really did. Remember, that's one of the things you bring a sin, the korban olav yoreh, which is what we're talking about. So if you intentionally lie and say, I don't know testimony, and you took an oath about it, intentionally you'd have to bring a korban. So that would be an example of a korban olav yoreh. That would be for intentional sin. And then we've got everything covered now, and that's what the three verses do. Now we're going to move to another bright. Tanya idach. Rabbi Shimon Omer, Minchat choteh shel kohanim nikmetzet, v'hakometz karev b'fnei atzmo, v'hashirayim krevim b'fnei atzmam. So that's Rabbi Shimon that we know. Again, the mincha choteh of a sin offering of a mincha of a kohen. You take the kmitza out, and then you burn both parts, the kmitza and the shirayim. And we saw the rabbi say, you burn the whole thing without taking a kometz out. Rabbi Lazar, but Rabbi Shimon Omer, hakometz karev b'atzmo, v'hashirayim mitpazrim al beit hadeshen. He says the kometz is sacrificed, but the shirayim gets sprinkled on or scattered on the Beit HaDeshen. Now the Beit HaDeshen, there were a few places called the Beit HaDeshen, so it's not exactly clear which one we're referring to. Amar Rabbi Chia bar Abba, Havi bar Rabbi Yochanan, he questioned, and he said, Beit HaDeshen dehecha, which one? Ida lamala, if it's the pile in the middle of the altar. You might remember, in the middle of the altar, there's a pile where they would pile up all the extra ashes from the piles where there were fires going, and they would pile them up in this pile in the middle. Now, maybe you would put it there. It was still hot because there were always some embers there. It was still live. So if that's the case, hainu avua, well, then it's really like his father, because you're basically saying you burn the kometz on the altar. It's not really not the shirayim on the altar. It's really not much different. All right, sorry, I said the kometz. I meant the shirayim. We're talking about the remainder, not the kometz. Ida lamata. Okay, lamata could mean there's a pile of something called the Beit HaDeshen, which is next to the ramp, okay, where we're going to see something else that goes there later today. Sort of like a garbage dumping pile. Or the Beit HaDeshen is completely even outside Jerusalem. That's where you bring the Parim and Nisrafim and the Sirim and Nisrafim, if you remember, the ones that go in the inner altar, and then you bring their bodies out there and you burn them there. So, a lot of the commentaries say we're talking about that. So, nothing really gets offered there. And the assumption is that we're supposed to be offering this as a sacrifice. So, Amarle Rabbi Abba, Dilma li'ibud, maybe it's not being offered. Maybe it's just put there and burned to get rid of it. They laughed at him and they said, what, is there something that is offered to be, right, like you're supposed to do this action to it, and it's offered to be left to nothing? So Tani Avuah de Rabbi Avin, he says, here we're going to explain it. And now we're going to see that you don't really, the assumption here seems to be that Kalil Tia, if you remember from the Pasuk, you're supposed to burn it completely. Okay, we're going to read the Pasuk now and you'll see. Kol minchat kohen Kalil Tia lo te'achel. This is a Pasuk that comes right after the griddle cake offering of the Kohen Gadol, which is completely burned. And then it says any mincha b'kohen is completely kalil tiyeh, which we assume means it's complete. What they generally assume is it means it's completely burned. Okay, and we're going to learn that really because in the pasuk about the chavitei kohen gadol it says kalil toktal, gets burned completely. So this is also burned completely, we assume. And that really means it's offered, completely offered, and lo te'achel, it can't be eaten. So now, if we assume that's the case, then we assume it's getting offered, right? It's like a sacrifice. And if it's getting sacrificed to go to nowhere, like just to be completely, destroyed, that's not the way you really offer things. So the way they're going to explain this is that the Tane Avodah de Rabbi Avin, the Braita, the father of Rabbi Avin brings, says the following: Kol minchat kohen kalil tiyeh lo te'achel, la'achilai kashtia v'lo ledavar achil. We're now saying that the real issue here is we're going to compare it to the mincha chavitin of the kohen gadol for lo te'achel purposes, that it can't be eaten, but not for anything else. Okay, so we don't exactly understand what this means yet. And Rava and Abai are going to have two explanations. The Gemara says, "My kamar, what exactly is he saying here?" So Amar Abai, Hachi kamar. Abai says this is what he really means to say. Kol minchat kohen lo te'achel, chovato, kalil tiyeh nidvato. This pasuk is actually including both a voluntary and an obligatory offering of the kohen, and it reads like this: Kol minchat. Now he does what we call serut mikra mesuras. He cuts and pastes, okay, like delete, cut something from here, paste it there. That's what he's doing, okay? Because the pasuk reads like this again: Kol minchat kohen kalil tiyeh lo te'achel. Now he says Kol minchat kohen, any obligatory offering, lo te'achel, and then he takes the words kalil tiyeh, puts them at the end. It says, oh, and that's talking about a voluntary offering. I'm like, Rava, sakina charifa mixed v'kakrai. What, did you take a sharp knife and cut the pasuk up? You can't do that. You can't change the order. Ela amar Rava. Rava says, no, this is the way to read it. Kol minchat kohen kalil tiyeh nidvato. No, any mincha of a kohen, either we can read this as like a topic sentence. We're now going to talk about all the menachot of a kohen, both obligatory and voluntary. And then we're going to start with the voluntary. Kalil tiyeh, voluntary nidvato. And then, or you could say maybe kol minchat kohen kalil tiyeh, the whole thing is talking about nidvato. And then the lo te'achel moves into the chovato. The obligation, the obligatory ones, meaning the sin offering, is just under lo te'achel. It doesn't actually have to be completely burnt. Since it doesn't have to be completely burnt, you could put it on the Beit HaDeshen, right, and maybe burn it there, but it's not being burnt as an offering. Okay, and with that we resolve the problem. So now the Gemara just asks on Rava. So we have two ways of reading the pasuk: either we have to cut and move it, or we just say that the beginning actually was talking all about the voluntary and it moved to the obligatory. Either which way, we put the lo te'achel together with, right, these were just two interpretations of that Braita that the father Rabbi Avin brought, and either which way we're going to basically say it doesn't really need to be burned. Now we can't eat it, but we don't have to burn it. So now the Gemara asks on Rava, v'ipochana, why don't we say lo te'achel is on the nedava, and the kalil tiyeh is specifically on the voluntary, and the kalil tiyeh that gets completely burnt maybe is on the obligatory offering, on the sin offering. So they say, mistabra nidvato havalei ribuye. Now, if we're going to connect one thing to the previous section of the mincha chavitin of the kohen gadol, and now we're going to play this game again, which is more similar to which? Which one would you assume has the same laws of the mincha chavitei kohen gadol? More likely nidvato, the voluntary one. Why? Shekain tidira, it's very common. Okay, how common is it that a kohen sins in one of the few particular things that you bring a sliding scale offering, and is too poor to bring it, right? Bring the animal or the bird, so brings the meal offering. It's already a very small group of people, whereas kohanim bringing voluntary offerings could be very common. Chavitei kohen gadol is very common because it's brought twice a day. So therefore they're similar in that sense. Lo chate, they don't come for sins, whereas the mincha comes for a sin. Basim reche, it has a good smell because they both come with frankincense, whereas the mincha comes with no frankincense. So then the Gemara says, Adrabah, chovato havalei l'ribuy. What do you mean? There's more similarities between the obligatory offering to the mincha chavitim because shekeni saron, they both have to come exactly in isaron, 1/10 of an ephah, no more, no less, whereas a voluntary offering could be whatever you volunteer. And chovan, they're both obligatory. Now notice the first had 3 similarities and the second was only 2, to which the Gemara says, hanach nefishin. There's more similarities in the end. It's a numbers game. There's more similarities to the voluntary offering, and that's why the voluntary offering is more similar to the mincha chavitei kohen gadol, which is burned completely, and not this one. Again, if you go with Rabbi Elazar, Rabbi Shimon's position. Now they say, V'Rabanan, Hai kol menchat kohen kalil tia lo te'achel mai avdele. So now how do the rabbis view this pasuk? So what they're really asking is, kalil tia, obviously, you burn it completely. But what is the lo te'achel? If you have to burn it completely, obviously you can't eat it. So they say, Mibayle l'chidetanya, he uses it for the following braita. This is a braita that we saw already on Daf Nun Aleph. Ein li ela elyona b'kalil toktal, b'tachtona b'lo te'achel. The upper one, meaning the mincha chavitim of the Kohen Gadol, is kalil toktal. It's completely burned. The second one just says completely. It doesn't say burnt. And the second one, the bottom one of the regular mincha of a Kohen, tachtona b'lo te'achel, can't be eaten. Now, how do we know that the second one is also burned completely, and the first one also has a prohibition to not eat it? Why does it matter? Well, if you're going to burn it, of course you can't eat it, but the point is you won't necessarily get lashes if you eat it. If it says lo te'achel, then you're going to get lashes for eating it. So how do we know you're going to get lashes if you eat the mincha chavitin of the Kohen Gadol? Talmud Lamal, kalil l'gzera shava. We're going to have gzera shava. Again, we learned this already, between kalil and kalil. שנאמר כאן כליל ונאמר להלן כליל. מה להלן בכליל תוקטל, אף כאן בכליל תוקטל. So כליל תוקטל applies to both. And מה כאן ליתן לא תעשה על אכילתו, אף להלן ליתן לא תעשה על אכילתו. And then you're going to learn this negative prohibition from one to the other. And just like it's by the Minchat Kohen, it's also going to be by the Minchat Chavitim. So that's what the rabbis do with that pasuk. Okay, with that, we finish our discussion of those three opinions. Again, Tanakama, you're going to burn the whole thing without taking a kometz at all. Rabbi Shimon, that you're going to take the kometz out, have kometz shirayim, and burn them each separately. According to Rabbi Elazar, Rabbi Shimon, who's Rabbi Shimon's son, he says you're going to separate them. He holds like his father. You take the kometz and the shirayim, and you have two separate things. But the kometz is going to get burnt on the altar, and the shirayim are going to go to this Beit Hadeshen, presumably outside Jerusalem, and they're not going to get burnt there. They're just going to be destroyed there, but not burnt as an offering, just destroyed. And we learned how he gets from the pasuk, because he reads that pasuk kalil as the kalil part of the burning is talking only about the voluntary, whereas the obligatory is actually is just the lo te'achel, can't be eaten. Okay, by Ravina. Now Ravina has a question. Kohen sha'achal min ha'imurim mahu. If a kohen eats from the imurim, what is the law? So before we get to the answer, the Gemara tells us, let's just be clear here. Turning now to Amud Bet, lav dizarut lo kamibayle. I'm not asking about the lo taseh of a non-kohen eating something they're not supposed to eat. Meaning, okay, let's be clear about this. If it's stuff that's supposed to go to the kohen, then a non-kohen can't eat it. And if a non-kohen eats it, it says kol zar lo yochal kodesh. Any non-kohen can't eat kodesh. Okay, obviously you get lashes for that. Now, what's obvious here? If a kohen eats the imurim is supposed to get burnt on the altar. They're like a zar eating something the kohen's supposed to eat. Basically, it's kohen eating something the altar was supposed to have, and the kohen ate it instead. Of course, he's going to get lashes for kol zar lo yochal kodesh. They're considered a zar, a stranger, for those issues, because for those items. So if a kohen, eats imurim, for sure they're going to get lashes for that. So what's the question? Ki kamebayeli, what I was asking a question about, Ravina says, it's actually not the Gemara talking, it's really Ravina saying, lav de kalil tiyeh mai. Is the lo taseh of kalil tiyeh, is that relevant? Meaning, okay, it's supposed to get burned, so now, what kalil tiyeh is the mincha of the kohen, but it's really saying anything that's supposed to be completely burnt has a prohibition of lo te'achil, can't be eaten. So maybe the imurim, which are supposed to be burnt, also have a prohibition of lo te'achil from the pasuk of kalil tiyeh. Maybe it just means anything that's supposed to be completely burned and isn't, and it's eaten, there's a lo taseh, there's a negative prohibition of don't eat it, and you'll get then two sets of lashes, one for being a zar who can't eat, and one for eating something that was supposed to be completely burnt. So Amar Rav Aaron the Ravina, Tashma. Rav Aaron says to Ravina, listen and learn from here. D'Tanya Rabbi Eliezer Omer, Kol shu b'kalil tiyeh, litain lo taseh l'chilato. He says it explicitly. Anything that's b'kalil tiyeh, that's supposed to be burned, there is a lo taseh if you eat it. And there you have it. Yes, the answer is you're going to get two sets of lashes. Okay, from here we move on to the next mission. Minchat Kohanim, Minchat Kohen Mashiach, Minchat Nesachim LaMizbeach. Okay, we're going to have two sections in this Mishnah. Then the Gemara is going to do the identical thing to both sections, ask the same two questions on each section. So the first section is talking about items that get completely burned. The Mincha of Kohanim, which we just discussed. Here we're really talking about voluntary offerings. Mincha Kohen Mashiach, the Mincha Chavitin of the Kohen Gadol. And Mincha Nisachim LaMizbeach, the mincha that goes with the libations of the sacrifices of the Korban Ola has Nisachim that go with it, also gets completely burnt. Ve'ein bahem leKohanim. Okay, nothing of that goes to the Kohanim. Ubezeh yafeh koch mizbeach mikoch haKohanim. In this situation, the koch of the mizbeach gets more than the Kohanim. But now we're going to bring the reverse case. Shtei alechem v'lechem hapanim nechalim leKohen ve'ein bahem leMizbeach. Here we now have the opposite case. The two loaves of bread that go with the Shavuot offering and the lechem hapanim, the showbread, are eaten by the Kohanim completely. None of it goes on the altar. And in this case, the Kohanim actually get more than the Mizbeach. So now the Gemara is going to ask on both of them, but first we're starting on the first section. V'tuleika, is there nothing else? What do you mean? Aren't there other things that get completely burned? Let's start. Ha'ika ola. What about a korban ola? That's completely burned. They say no. Ika ola leKohanim. The hide of the ola goes to the Kohanim, so that's not listed here because it's not really completely to the Mizbeach. Not completely burnt. Va'ika ola ha'of. What about the ola of a bird, where it gets completely burned and there's no hide there, there's no skin? So ika mor'a v'notza. Okay, the mor'a and the notza, these two parts, the feathers and the crop, they take out those parts, kind of like the gross parts, and they throw them actually in the Beit HaDeshen that's on the floor next to the ramp that we talked about. They throw them there. Okay, they don't actually go to the Kohanim, but they also don't get burned on the altar. So it's not completely burnt. Va'ika nisachim, what about the libations? Here we're talking about the wine that you pour into the altar. Completely. So they say lishitin azli. No, those go, if you remember, into those chutes. Remember there were cups they put at the top of the Mizbeach and there were these holes, and it would go through the hole and all the way down to the ground. So it's not really like it goes on the altar. Okay, so those are all the answers to the questions of why aren't these listed. Now they ask, umay bezel. Why does it say, in this case, yafeh koch mizbeach from koch haKohanim? Sounds like they're trying to go against something somebody said. So they say, yes, in fact, la'afuke midah Shmuel. They're trying to go against Shmuel, the Amar Shmuel, hamitnadev yayim mivi'o mizafo al gabei ishim. If you volunteer to bring wine, you actually put it on the fire. Kamash malan de l'shitin azlei. Now, according to Shmuel, another one in the list would be a wine libation, because if you bring your own voluntary, you say, I'm bringing wine on the altar, you would actually pour it on the fire. Okay, the nisachim, the libations that go with the sacrifice, is poured into the shitin, but if you say, I'm bringing wine on the altar, you actually have to pour it on the fire, and then it would be another case of something that's completely burned. And here they're saying, only in these, meaning we don't agree with Shmuel about this, kamash malan de l'shitin azlei. They're trying to say, no, if you volunteer wine, you pour it into those holes that go down the chute. However, even though this is going against Shmuel, it actually supports a different statement of Shmuel. Misayeh le'Shmuel da'amar Shmuel haminadev shemen komtzo v'shiarav ne'chalin. If you volunteer oil, then you actually take a kometz and the remainder is eaten. Okay, so now what are we saying here? Well, the shemen isn't listed here because if you volunteer oil, you don't put all the oil on the altar, because the shemen, you actually take a kometz, only the kometz goes on the altar and the shivayim are eaten. This, by the way, sets up an interesting, you can almost, if you compare the wine and the oil, why, according to Shmuel, does the wine get completely poured on the altar and the oil doesn't, only a kometz? And this maybe teaches us a little about what a kometz is. It seems like the sacrifices, we don't actually want to bring the whole thing on the altar. We want to have a remainder for the Kohen, or sometimes it's for the owner. And usually it's for the Kohen, but in certain, like a shlamim, it goes to the owner. But we don't, right, other than an ola, which gets completely burned, and a few other things, but in general, we want to have a remainder. Now, in order to do that, you have to take some out and put it on the altar. Now, you can take a kometz if it's oil, because you can put it in your hand. But you can't take a kometz of wine because it'll spill right through your hands. It's too thin. That seems to be the difference between oil and wine. And it seems to be also highlighting this issue of we want it, But we don't really want to burn everything, so ideally take a kometz and then leave the rest. Okay. So now we're going to ask the exact same two questions. First, v'chuleka, is there nothing else? V'yika chatat ha'of. What about the chatat ha'of, which is completely given to the Kohen? So, ikadama. No, the blood actually goes on the altar, so again, there's something that's not given to the Kohanim. V'yika log shemen shel mitzorah. What about the log of the mitzorah? Okay, well, that already we know. Ika matnotav, because you do take a kometz out, right, a handful. Kohen takes the handful, sprinkles it on the parochet, then on the ear and the finger and the toe of the leper. So not all of it goes to the Kohen. Right, just what was left after taking the handful, that goes to the Kohen. Umay bezo. Okay, what about bezo here? But by the way, there were less things here to add to the list of weight, but what about things that go completely to the Kohen? What about bezo? If you bring the shtei halechem by themselves, there's no korban for some reason, then they would get completely burned. Okay? Just want to look for a second. Right. If you don't have kfasim, right? This is in the case, remember, they're not ma'akev ze'etzeh. So if you don't have sheep, then you bring them by themselves, but you have to burn them. So there you see there's a case, right, where they wouldn't go to the Kohen. So our Mishnah is saying, Kamash Malan, Tibzo Yafeh Koch Kohanim La'olam. Okay, our Mishnah doesn't believe that. Our Mishnah thinks they always go to the Kohanim, even if there's no sheep, and that's why the Mishnah says in this way, they go completely to the Kohanim. Okay, new Mishnah. Kol hamenachot hanasot b'kli. Okay, what is the kli? Like the machvat and the marcheshet and the pans. They're made in a pan, which is a sanctified vessel. Tu'unot shlosha matnot shemen. They need 3 matnot shemen. If you remember, we talked about this on Daf Samach Zayin. The Mishnah there seemed to talk about 2. Wasn't so clear. So now we're going to see there's 3. Yitzika, belila, umatan shemen b'kli, kodem lasiyatan. Okay, this is actually out of order. I'm going to go backwards. Matan shemen b'kli, kodem lasiyatan means the first thing you're going to put in the bowl is the oil. Then you're going to put the solet. Then you're going to do the belila. Again, I'm going in reverse order. You're going to add more oil and mix it. Then you're going to do the yitzika, which is pouring some oil on the top of it. Chalot bolelan divrei Rebbe. Rebbe says you're going to mix them, the oil, when you do the oil for the middle stage, the belila, you're going to do it when they're already formed into loaves. Okay, we had the whole thing, how many loaves, 10 loaves, So you're going to do it when they're already loaves. Chachamim omrim solet. Now, Chachamim say you're going to put the belila, mix it in when it's still just flour. Okay, you do it earlier. You don't make the loaves and then add this oil. No, you add the oil before you make the loaves. Hachalot tu'unot belila urikikim mishicha. Okay, now when it comes to the menachot ma'afet tanur, what we call them, one's baked in the oven. So there's the rikikim, right? I'm going to read you the pasuk again. V'chita kriv korban minchat ma'afet tanur. Sole chalot matzot belulot bashemen. You're going to have chalot matzot, which are mixed with oil, and rikikei matzot meshuchim bashemen, and these other rikikim, which are anointed with oil, which is the yitzika. So now they're going to say the chalot need belila and the rikikim mishicha. Okay, these are different. These are not the same as the others that need yitzika, belila, and matan shemen b'kli. These are done differently. We're going to see that in the Gemara in a minute. As soon as we get there, but they don't go in a kli because they get baked in an oven. They don't get baked in a pan, and the oven that they use is a chol. It's not a sanctified oven. It's just a regular oven. So they're different, and they don't need the 3 stages. And one needs the belila, and one needs the yitzika. Okay, and that's because of the way it says in the pasuk. Ketzab moshchan. How do you do mishicha? Kimim ki. That's the X, the Greek letter that's in the shape of an X. Vashar nechalim the kohanim, and the rest gets eaten by the kohanim. Okay, the remainder of these. Okay, lemiute mai. Okay, this is the remainder of the oil gets eaten by the kohanim. Lemiute mai. So now we'll just end with this last line, and then we'll leave the brighter for the next class. Kol menachot hanasot b'kli need 3 oils. So Tanu Rabbanan, lemiute mai. What does this come to exclude? Amar Rav Papa lemiute minchat ma'afeh. To say the minchat ma'afeh, which are the rikikim and the chalot, they don't need, because again, they don't go in this sanctified vessel, and therefore they don't have all this process as before, and that's what it's coming to exclude. That's why it said specifically, kol menachot hanasot b'kli, meaning in a sanctified vessel. And with that, we finish for today's stuff. We'll start with this Braita in tomorrow's class. So what do we have here? We did today, we started with the Braitot that show the sources for the rabbi's position and Rabbi Shimon's position about what to do with the Mincha Chotev HaKohen. Then we saw that there was a third opinion of Rabbi Elazar, okay, who basically said that the Shiraim actually just get put to nowhere's land, right? We want to take them to the Beit HaDeshen and just burn them there for ibud purposes, just to get rid of them. And then we said, what's your source for it, right? Where do you get that? And then he had this unique interpretation, which Rav and Abai each had a different way of reading it, but a unique interpretation of the pasuk about Kalil Tiyeh Lo Te'achel. The Lo Te'achel refers to the obligatory offering, whereas the Kalil Tiyeh refers to the voluntary offering. And then, so there's really no obligation to offer it up on the altar, and that's where he gets that opinion. Then we have Rava's question about the Imurim, that the Kohen actually, in fact, is obligated to transgresses two negative prohibitions for eating Imurim, the parts that are supposed to go on the altar. And then that led us almost into the next Mishnah, which is about items that are completely on the altar and items that are completely to the Kohanim. And then we had the same kind of questions on each one. Aren't there more? No. Each one had something else. It's not completely 100% to the Kohanim or to the altar. And we had the question, why is it saying in this case, right? It was coming to kind of disagree with some other opinion in one unique situation. And then we ended with how you do the oil in the preparation of the mincha offerings of the machbad and the marcheshet, and how you do it in the ma'afet tanur and how it's different. And with that, we finish for today. Wishing everyone a good day. B'sorot tovot.